The crunch of wrapping paper under little feet was the first betrayal. It was a distinct sound, a papery whisper that usually signaled the joyous chaos of Christmas morning. But this year it felt like a clandestine announcement, a secret revealed before I was ready. Then the bright, shiny bows scattered like fallen jewels across the worn rug confirmed it. My mom, who had so firmly, so definitively said, "No Christmas gifts this year, darling, we're keeping it simple," had somehow managed to produce an entire pile of them, just for my children. And not just a few stocking stuffers tucked away on a mantelpiece. These were properly wrapped, nestled beneath the twinkling tree, each one bearing a name scrawled in her familiar looping script. My kids, bless their unsuspecting hearts, their faces still soft with sleep and the lingering magic of Santa, were already diving in, their eyes alight with a pure, unadulterated joy that was, for me, laced with a sudden sharp bitterness, a taste I knew all too well. It had been a long time coming, this particular brand of familial disregard. For years my family, my parents, my siblings, their spouses, operated on an unspoken hierarchy of gift-giving. It wasn't about the monetary value, not really. Anyone could buy a gift. It was about the effort, the thought, the acknowledgement that you were seen, that you mattered. And for the last 5 years, since my husband and I had started navigating our own financial ups and downs, since we'd made the difficult but necessary decision to curb our own spending to protect our future, I'd been systematically excluded. Not overtly, of course. Nothing so dramatic, no raised voices or public pronouncements. It was always couched in understanding, in feigned concern. "Oh, we know things are tight," my mother would say, her hand patting my arm with a practiced sympathetic gesture. "Don't worry about us. We're just happy to see you." Which, translated through years of learned experience, meant, don't expect anything from us and don't bother getting us anything either, because we know you can't, and frankly, we don't want the obligation of having to reciprocate or feel guilty about it. The first year I'd taken her at her word. Naive perhaps. I'd bought a few small, thoughtful things for my nieces and nephews, the children of my siblings, things I'd painstakingly chosen from clearance racks or second-hand shops, and presented them with a genuine smile, hoping the sentiment would override the perceived lack of value. The smiles I received back from my siblings were polite, almost rehearsed, but a little strained around the edges. My own children, then very young, their faces still innocent of the complexities of adult relationships, had received nothing. Not a single cookie, not a handmade ornament from Grandma. My mother had been particularly emphatic that year. "Just experiences, darling. That's what matters. Memories are the true gifts." I'd nodded, forcing a smile, and promised myself I would embrace this new philosophy of togetherness. Yet, the following Christmas, a mere 12 months later, my brother's son, who was only a few years older than my own son, had unwrapped a brand new gaming console, its box gleaming under the tree lights. And my sister's daughter, my own niece, had received a designer handbag, the kind I only saw in magazines, its leather impossibly smooth. The experiences message had apparently been selectively applied, conveniently forgotten when it came to their own grandchildren, the ones who benefited from their abundant generosity. Each year since, the pattern had solidified, becoming as predictable as the turning of the seasons. I'd receive a group email, usually in early December, a digital harbinger of the season's veiled disappointments, from my mother. "This year let's all agree to go gift-free. It's just too much, isn't it? So much stress and expense. Let's focus on spending time together, on the warmth of family." My siblings, without fail, would chime in with enthusiastic agreement, their replies flooding my inbox with emojis and affirmations of shared sentiment. And then, without fail, on Christmas morning, photos would flood my social media feed, each one a carefully crafted tableau of familial inclusion. My brother's family, posing proudly with their haul, their faces beaming. My sister's children, their faces smeared with chocolate from the expensive artisanal chocolates they'd received, each bite a testament to their privileged status. My parents beaming, surrounded by a festive display of presents they had, of course, given to everyone else. Except me. Except my children. The unspoken narrative was clear. I tried to ignore it, to tell myself it didn't matter. I'd focused on creating our own traditions, on making our own Christmases special, a sanctuary of warmth and abundance for my own little family. We'd had pajama breakfasts with hot cocoa, elaborate gingerbread house BU, Ilding sessions, and movie nights with mountains of popcorn. But the constant, silent exclusion, the subtle but persistent message that my family, and by extension my children, were somehow less deserving, began to wear on me, like a persistent ache that wouldn't fade. It felt like a deliberate erasure, a way of saying, "You don't quite measure up." A quiet judgment delivered not through words, but through the conspicuous absence of tangible affection. The gift-free rule was never applied to them, only to me. It was a peculiar form of control, a way to enforce their own perceived generosity, their self-image as benevolent providers, while simultaneously denying me the simple pleasure of participating in a shared ritual, of feeling like an equal part of the family tapestry. This year, when the gift-free email arrived, I'd felt a weariness settle deep in my bones, a heavy leaden sensation that had been building for months. I typed out a brief reply, agreeing as always with a polite sigh. But something had shifted in the intervening weeks, a subtle internal recalibration. Perhaps it was seeing the hopeful look on my children's faces as they packed their bags for Grandma's house. A quiet anticipation for the magic they always hoped Christmas held. A magic I secretly feared they would be denied. Perhaps it was a comment from a friend, casually mentioning how her in-laws always made sure her kids felt included, their gifts arriving in their own mailbox, a tangible sign of affection from that side of the family. Whatever it was, a quiet resolve had begun to form, a small steady flame flickering in the darkness of my resentment. I didn't want to make a scene. I didn't want to yell or accuse, to unleash the pent-up frustration that had been simmering for so long. That would only lead to defensiveness, to more excuses, to me being painted as the unreasonable one, the ungrateful daughter-in-law. I wanted the truth to simply be, to manifest itself without my direct intervention. And the truth, I realized, was that my mother's pronouncements were often just that, pronouncements. They were statements of intent that rarely matched her actions, especially when it came to her grandchildren who weren't hers directly, the ones who occupied a different rung on her unspoken hierarchical ladder. So on Christmas Eve, after my kids were tucked into bed, their small bodies finally still after a day of anticipation and excitement, I'd done something small, something almost insignificant, a quiet act of rebellion. I'd taken a few of the more generic presents my siblings had sent me and my husband over the years, the kind that are clearly regifted, or bought in bulk for the obligatory exchange with distant relatives, the kind that scream thoughtlessness, and I'd added a few small, inexpensive items from my own house. A sparkly hair clip I bought on impulse during a moment of weakness at the checkout counter, a slightly worn but still perfectly good board game we'd outgrown, a bright, colorful scarf that had been a gift to me, and had never quite suited my style. I'd then wrapped them all in plain brown paper, tied with plain twine, the antithesis of the festive, glossy paper and elaborate ribbons my mother favored, and written names on them in a neat, impersonal block print, mimicking the style of the mass-produced gift tags that were becoming ubiquitous in my parents' home, a subtle nod to their own brand of effort. I'd placed these few, carefully chosen gifts amongst the larger, more elaborate presents that my mother had clearly bought for my children, positioning them like quiet insurgent messages within the established order. The next morning the house buzzed with the usual festive chaos, a symphony of excited squeals and tearing paper. My mother, fluttery and delighted, her eyes sparkling with the satisfaction of a conductor orchestrating a flawless performance, was overseeing the unwrapping. My children, their eyes wide and shining, were tearing into the brightly colored packages, exclaiming with each new discovery. And then they started finding them. The plain brown paper parcels, stark against the vibrant backdrop. My son, usually so eager, picked one up, his brow furrowed in a rare moment of confusion. "Who's this from?" he asked, his voice a little tentative, looking around the room with a questioning gaze. My mother, mid-sentence about the unparalleled joy of the season, paused. She glanced at the simple wrapping, her smile faltering for a fraction of a second. Her eyes flickered over the block lettering, the impersonal script. She opened her mouth as if to offer an explanation, then closed it, a subtle tension tightening her jaw. My daughter, meanwhile, had already opened her gift. It was the sparkly hair clip. She held it up, a little uncertainly, turning it in the light. "It's pretty," she offered, her voice small, a hopeful question hanging in the air. My mother's face, which had been a mask of practiced cheer, faltered. A tiny line appeared between her eyebrows, a subtle ripple of unease disturbing the smooth surface of her composure. She looked at the hair clip, then at the plain brown paper, then at me, her gaze lingering for a moment. There was a flicker of something in her eyes, confusion perhaps, or a dawning uncomfortable realization that her carefully constructed narrative was beginning to unravel. Throughout the morning, as my children opened the rest of these anonymous, plainly wrapped gifts, the atmosphere subtly shifted. The initial unbridled excitement began to temper, replaced by a more muted curiosity. My mother kept glancing at them, her usual effusive praise noticeably subdued, her explanations less enthusiastic. My siblings, caught in the crossfire of her subtle discomfort, grew quieter, their own gift opening slowed by an unspoken awareness that something was amiss. The energy of the room, which had always been powered by my mother's carefully curated displays of generosity, the outward projection of her love and attention, seemed to deflate like a balloon losing its air. There was no grand announcement, no public shaming. It was simply the quiet introduction of a jarring note into a perfectly composed symphony, a dissonant chord that couldn't be ignored. Later that day, as we were packing up to leave, the familiar ritual of farewells and promises to do it again soon, my mother cornered me in the kitchen, her voice low, almost a whisper, as if confiding a secret. "Those little gifts," she began, her gaze fixed on the gleaming surface of the dishwasher, her hands fiddling with a dish towel, a nervous habit I'd noticed since childhood. "They weren't from me. Were they from your siblings? Did they send some small things for the children and forget to mention it?" I looked at her, my expression neutral, a practiced calm I'd cultivated over years of similar encounters. "No, Mom," I said, my voice calm and even, betraying none of the quiet triumph bubbling beneath the surface. "They weren't from them either." She looked up then, her eyes searching mine, a desperate plea for clarification in their depths. The practiced smile was gone, replaced by a flicker of something I hadn't seen in a long time, vulnerability. It was a raw, unguarded look that momentarily stripped away the layers of artifice. She knew. She understood in that moment that her carefully constructed system of selective exclusion, her subtle way of maintaining a perceived hierarchy of affection, had been quietly, irrevocably dismantled. The gifts under the tree, the ones she'd so carefully orchestrated to highlight her own generosity, were no longer just presents. They were also a stark reminder of her own choices, her own patterns of behavior, laid bare not by an accusation, but by the simple, undeniable presence of plainly wrapped parcels that spoke of a different kind of giving, a different kind of acknowledgement, one that was not about public display or reciprocal obligation, but about quiet inclusion. The silence that followed was not awkward, not laced with the tension that had defined our conversations for years. It was just quiet, and in that quiet there was a strange, unexpected peace, a sense of resolution that had been long overdue.